Posted to YouTube by Alexander Oliver Jones to channel Castle Corbenic on the 16th of August, 2026, just before noon. The post reads, "The life of my Suffolk stalker is a life I would not wish on anyone. Here is a life that is sad, empty, lonely, miserable and impotent. If the life of this stalker was a garden, it would be a desolate wasteland of bindweed, thorns, and dead stuff. I argue that our life is a story that we write through the choices and actions we make each day. It is the quality of our lives that makes them worth living, often made up of small things that together make up an amazing daily life. My day usually starts with playing with a kitten. Leaving home at sunset yesterday, a fox stepped out onto the road and watched me, then a second fox came out and did the same thing behind the first fox, then the bats came out. This morning a muntjac bolted across the busy road in front of me. Small events, magical moments. Contrast the above with the predictable empty life of the Suffolk stalker. The stalker starts their day calling Simone a whore of Satan on YouTube, followed by a post to another victim promising torture and death. Abuse and threats against hundreds of victims is the sum of the daily life story of the Suffolk stalker. The children of my client are living amazing magical lives. The Suffolk stalker dumped their own children to give their full unwanted attention on the lives of the children of my client. The Suffolk stalker is too busy abusing and stalking other people to have the time to get a job, so they live in poverty, whilst trying to convince the world they are significant and influential, when most of the world ignores them. Past 40, it is hard to see that stalker ever getting a well-paid career, because all they want to do is to obsess and focus on the lives of others than on their own empty life. Yes, I can give you a psychological formulation of the behavior. The behavior you describe is psychologically concerning, especially if it is persistent, directed at numerous people, and involves allegations, threats, monitoring, and attempts to interfere with people's lives. What stands out psychologically? The most striking feature of the passage is the disproportion between the writer's actual relationship with the person being discussed and the intensity of their preoccupation with them. You say you've never spoken to this man and have had no meaningful interaction with him, yet he apparently devotes substantial amounts of time to writing about you, making accusations about you, contacting institutions concerning you, and attempting to affect your reputation and livelihood. If that account is accurate, a clinician might describe this as persistent preoccupation or fixation. The passage itself contains several things a professional might pay attention to. Dehumanizing language. He doesn't simply criticize behavior, he constructs an elaborate portrait of the person as empty, miserable, impotent, worthless, and morally corrupt. Moral absolutism. The person is presented as wholly bad, while the writer implicitly occupies the position of the morally superior observer. Elaborate assumptions about an individual's private life. He claims to know what the person's life is like, what they do every morning, why they don't work, what their relationships are like, what their future career prospects are, and what their children are experiencing. If he doesn't actually know this person, that raises questions about how he arrives at such certainty. Preoccupation with people he apparently does not personally know. That's particularly important. Ordinary disagreement usually has some reciprocal relationship behind it. Spending extensive time constructing narratives about strangers is qualitatively different. Repetition and escalation. If the behavior really occurs daily over a prolonged period, the persistence itself becomes clinically more significant than any individual post. Intrusion into unrelated domains. Contacting councils, police, payment providers, employers, businesses, or other institutions to make allegations about someone can represent an escalation from online hostility into real-world interference. There may indeed be projection, but we can't establish that. Your observation about projection is psychologically plausible, but I'd phrase it cautiously. The passage spends an extraordinary amount of energy describing another person's supposed emptiness, loneliness, lack of achievement, poverty, lack of relationships, impotence, and failure. Sometimes people externalize characteristics or emotions that are uncomfortable for them to acknowledge in themselves. But you cannot infer from this passage alone that projection is occurring. There is another possibility. The writer may have constructed a psychological narrative in which the target has become a symbolic villain. Once somebody has been placed into that role, contradictory evidence can become irrelevant. The person isn't being encountered as a real, complex human being anymore. They're being encountered as the stalker, the fraud, the child abuser, the evil person, etc. That can create a self-reinforcing cycle. Belief searching for confirming material, interpreting everything through the belief, greater certainty, increased activity against the target. That doesn't necessarily mean psychosis. People can become intensely obsessive and persecutory without having a diagnosable psychotic disorder. The most important distinction. I would separate what disorder does this person have from what does this person's behavior demonstrate. The latter can be assessed much more confidently. If your description and the documentary evidence are accurate, the behavior could reasonably be characterized as persistent fixation plus hostile rumination plus obsessive monitoring plus extreme attribution of negative motives plus reputational attacks plus boundary violations plus escalation into third-party intervention. Those are meaningful behavioral observations without needing to diagnose him. And importantly, you don't need him to have a psychiatric disorder for the behavior to be abusive or potentially criminal. Someone can be psychologically perfectly capable of understanding what they're doing and still engage in sustained harassment. One thing in the passage particularly interests me. The opening paragraph about your supposed empty life is almost entirely unrelated to establishing whether you have committed whatever wrongdoing he alleges. Instead, he spends a great deal of effort attacking your character, lifestyle, sexuality, employment, parenting, social status, and worth as a human being. That's a classic shift from, I believe this person has done X, to, this person is fundamentally a terrible human being. Once the second proposition has taken hold, virtually anything can become justification for continued hostility. The foxes, bats, kitten, and muntjac in your description are actually relevant here not because they prove anything psychologically about him, but because they illustrate the extraordinary degree to which he appears to have made your life his subject. His constructing a story about what your life supposedly means while, according to your account, having little or no actual relationship with you. How might a professional describe it? If you took a substantial body of this material to a clinical psychologist, rather than asking is this man crazy, I think the much more useful question would be, what behavioral and psychological characteristics are demonstrated by this person's prolonged fixation on me, given that we have never had a relationship or meaningful interaction? A professional might investigate obsessional thinking, hostile attribution bias, rumination, grievance fixation, narcissistic or grandiose traits, persecutory ideation, difficulties with boundaries, emotional dysregulation, and possible projection. They would then want to know whether the beliefs are merely extreme opinions, overvalued ideas, or fixed false beliefs impervious to evidence. That distinction is important when considering possible paranoid or delusional processes, but it cannot be made from one post. From your perspective, the practical issue is actually clearer. If this really has been happening for years, don't get too focused on proving what is psychologically wrong with him. The stronger evidential question is, what did he do, when did he do it, what evidence establishes that he did it, what was the consequence, and how does the behavior form a continuing pattern? Preserve the original posts, dates, URLs, screenshots, messages, correspondence with third parties, evidence of account payment interference, and anything showing that allegations were communicated to others. Keep the original material rather than only your interpretation of it. That gives a solicitor, police officer, platform investigator, or other professional something much more useful than a diagnosis, an objectively documented pattern of conduct. And one final point, the fact that somebody appears obsessed with you does not establish that you are the cause of their obsession, nor does the intensity of their accusations give those accusations evidential weight. A person can be extraordinarily certain about something that is completely untrue.